Noah Hoffman and Politics Joe, Ava Santina Evans. Guys, good to see you again. And we're going to kick off the discussion once again with the focus on benefits and related topics for the government. And we could have picked any number of the papers. Here's a little taste of them. The Times, Minister's Way delay to soften the welfare cuts. The Telegraph front page, Starmer benefits U-turn will blow £5 billion pounds hole in the budget, and as well on the Express, Labour's fuel U-turn in total chaos. Guys, there's quite a lot of aspects to this story. The one I just wanted to start on, Ava, was if you're going to go for a little bit of a U-turn, which of course we've already seen very clearly, although we don't know the details on the winter fuel payment, maybe there's other areas to come, you'd hope to win the political kind of cachet of that in the immediate short term. Do you think that Labour has done that, or do you think they've had the U-turn and perhaps not regained some of that political capital?
I mean, we're heading into summer, so if Starmer is to commit in the spending review in a couple of weeks' time to, reinstating the winter fuel payment, you're not actually going to see the benefit of that until next winter. So actually they're sort of getting ahead of themselves. And by the time 6 months' time, when pensioners or some of them are receiving that stipend again to put their heating on, it'll be a bit too late and it won't be picked up in the papers. So they've sort of blown quite a lot of their political cash on abolishing this in the first place. But the one place where they could pick up a few points is on the two-child benefit cap. It's a very popular policy. It always polls very well about abolishing it. It was first introduced in 2017 under George Osborne, and it was particularly unpopular. You know, at the moment, we've just seen Boris Johnson's just had his 9th child, and I'm sure that he would be looking to cash in on that two-child benefit cap lift. I think that could be rather helpful for him at this time. It would also, you know, it would prove very popular with his backbenchers who have long wanted to see this abolished. And there are a number of Gordon Brownites who are in the Parliamentary Labour Party at the moment, and he is a huge proponent of abolishing this and lifting nearly 1 million children out of poverty.
What's the political cost, Noah, if he did abolish it?
So the political cost is going to be the price and how it's paid for. So all these public services and all the benefits that Labour backbenchers are really pushing for, some will be really popular with the public, others won't. But ultimately, they will all come at a hefty cost to the Treasury, even if down the line, as Ava's mentioned before, there is a net benefit. In the short to immediate term, there is going to be a cost. And Labour has made this very stringent pledge about whether or not which taxes are acceptable to rise. And they knocked out a whole load of them in their general election manifesto, income tax, VAT. So, this is the main cost. Then the other sort of less important but nonetheless noticeable impact of this is Starmer and his tradition of U-turns and sort of what the public thinks about where his principles lie. If he is able to go out on the media, on the doorstep and really push for a policy, really make strong arguments in favour of cutting benefits, why does that suddenly change when the pressure comes from his backbenchers and comes from the likes of Reform and not rather the argument coming from people who are impacted by the policies such as the benefit cuts? So I guess that's the two-pronged response. But the main one is the Treasury. We know that Rachel Reeves is struggling for money to spend on any public service, let alone benefits. So how is he going to pay for it? What taxes, if any, will go up? We saw that recently Angela Rayner, one of her team, we suppose, sent to the press a memorandum with the list of tax rises that she would prefer. This was sort of quickly shut down by the Treasury, who said none of Rayner's ideas are going to actually come to fruition. But with that being said, just the talk of tax rises is going to perhaps lead to some frustration among both voters and the markets as well.
I mean, Ava, it looks, as all things stand, even without extra welfare payments, that tax rises are going to be necessary come the autumn, just because of the growth picture, the interest rate picture. Is it legitimate now for the government to drop some of those manifesto pledges because of world events, because we're over a year from the election come the autumn, or do you think they'll try and hold them firm?
The only manifesto pledge that they've got to commit to with tax rises is nothing raised on working people. And I think that actually there is quite a lot of room for manoeuvring there. So if you look at someone like, well, Gordon Brown's ideas about taxation, he always talks about taxing gambling, and you would tax that at source. So it would be the consumer who pays for that. Or putting a tax onto commercial banking, adding a 2% levy on banks like NatWest. And through doing that, you wouldn't actually be putting the cost onto, quote unquote, working people. So you could make the argument that you haven't actually broken any manifesto pledges.
And just finally, Noah, on this whole debate, what do you think it implies for who's winning the sort of internal cabinet battles at the moment? It's interesting from Sam Coates' reporting and others over the course of the last week or so. The suggestion was that Rachel Reeves led the U-turn on winter fuel payments, but then that also raises the question as to why it was put in place in the first place.
Yeah, so we're seeing a very interesting sort of split between the more so-called soft left within the cabinet and then the more centre left. And it's interesting that Rachel Reeves sort of spearheaded that U-turn when she's seen as a figure in cabinet who is more open to the idea of restricting money for public services and really trying to save and follow these tight fiscal rules. I think also I wanted to mention, Ava brought up a really good point about Gordon Brown and his influence on benefits policies. A lot of the backbench anger, and this is quite interesting distinction now over these benefit cuts, are not necessarily just coming from a group of people who I like to call the usual suspects, who are on the more left flank of the party and who will complain about basically anything Keir Starmer does and just want Jeremy Corbyn to come back. The people who are now really frustrated are also people who will identify as both Brownites and Blairites as well. And that also translates to the cabinet and the splits that we're seeing in cabinet. So right now, I think we've got one team that's led very much by Morgan McSweeney, who's one of Keir Starmer's top advisors. He wants to follow a much more sort of tight control on the budget and be more targeted in where spending goes towards, you know, trying to please voters who would traditionally be working class, but also not necessarily right on the breadline claiming benefits. So people in the sort of red wall seats in that demographic. Then we have on the other side the likes of sort of Ed Miliband, Lucy Powell, who are much more amenable to more generous welfare policies. And that's a really interesting split that we're seeing sort of spill out in the public now. Also, not to mention Angela Rayner, a key figure in that camp as well.
Ava, you smiled at the usual suspects versus unusual suspects. Do you think that the scale of rebellion, if not for some of these little U-turns that the government would have faced, would have been sufficient to defeat them in a key bill or not?
I think what would have frightened the Labour leadership is that it was more moderate Labour MPs who were turning against the PIP payments.
The unusual suspects,
I suppose the unusual suspects. The sort of the more 2024 intake. So you're looking at like even there are a number of sort of, I guess they're sort of factions, but they're sort of Starmer backing factions who were then reporting in that they wouldn't be able to support the PIP payments. And I think that what was frightening was the visual of these MPs having to queue up in the division lobby to vote to cut benefits. I mean, that is a rather haunting image that they were worried to take back to their constituents, especially if they've only just gotten into Parliament. At the next election, obviously, that's going to be thrust upon posters, in the next election. I think it would be incredibly damaging for them. But it is this more moderate move that I think is swaying those at the top.
Really fascinating on all of those points. Let's move on now to the next story that we've got in, which is on the Mirror and in Ukraine. Trump's silence did this. This is some comments coming from President Zelensky.
Yes, so really interesting, the rhetoric being ramped up after Ukraine suffered a night of absolutely horrific bombardment, 69 missiles, 298 drone attacks. And he took to Telegram to say, where is the outrage? Where is the call for action from Donald Trump, who he suggests is a main arbiter of trying to calm down Russia, though quite unsuccessfully. And interestingly, we've seen in a few poll clips on Sky that Trump has now come out and made some comments on the attacks, effectively saying he thinks that President Putin has lost it and he needs to stop the killing. But the problem here is that Trump will change his mind on who is sort of in the wrong within the Russia-Ukraine conflict on a near daily, if not hourly basis. So his words following this plea from Zelensky to say something about the nature of this attack, I'm sure will be welcome in Kyiv. But at the same time, what's he going to say tomorrow? Is he going to turn his fire back on Zelensky, as we've seen, in the previous year? Months, if not year, of the conflict, and this constant tit for tat actually doesn't achieve any results. The war is raging on. Putin hasn't stopped his barbaric invasion. In fact, this was the worst night in a long time for Ukraine in terms of the bombardment. So I can understandably, Zelensky is now getting frustrated, but he needs to be careful in how he manages diplomacy, because we saw in the White House when he let emotions get the better of him, that didn't end up helping his cause, and Ukraine is very reliant on US aid to help in this battle.
As you said, interesting in light of those comments overnight from President Trump as well. Ava, you've gone for the front page of The Eye, and HS2 plunged into fresh chaos as major tax fraud claims emerged. Not more fresh chaos.
I just thought it was exciting. It was like a vintage story, wasn't it? I don't think we've heard enough about HS2 recently, and also we've just seen, a number of rail operators are being taken back under national control. We've just seen South Western Railway as the most recent railway to be taken under sort of umbrella arm of nationalisation that Labour have introduced. It's just really exciting to see that there are more problems with HS2. So there's some questions over one of the subcontractors, and that they were they were falsely declaring that self-employed workers were PAYE when they weren't. It's just, it's in a swathe of, errors and misjudgments that have been, have plagued the construction of HS2. We've still got a whole, that there's a lot of land after Birmingham onwards that was bought up by the government that still hasn't been sold. So there's just so many problems with this rail line, and at this point it's like, just blow it all up, like it's over.
Well, it's a fascinating one, and the other question that's linked to it is planning reform.
Yes.
And of course, all the planning reform is going to come too late for the decade of delays and cost overruns for HS2 itself. But the question is whether they do enough on planning reform to prevent this sort of eventuality again. And that's kind of slightly up in the air, and the bill is still progressing, so a way to go yet. But to be fair to the government either way, they're certainly going a hell of a lot further than the prior Tory government on planning reform. Yeah,
absolutely. And the fact that it's taken this long for people to finally lift out their heads out of the stand, for ministers to actually take action, is ridiculous. Who can forget the iconic, now I might say, £500 million back tunnel that took up so much time and resources from HS2. It's absolutely embarrassing, and especially when you go to and you look at the likes of Japan and how quickly they can build national infrastructure, and you even in Europe, and then you walk around bits of rural England and there's still just these massive holes where seemingly no work has been done, despite the fact that this has been going on for years and years. I do think that Keir Starmer's pledge to rip up planning reforms and Angela Rayner's sort of drive to really get the nation building is very genuine. You can see progress in this bill, and let's not forget that Labour has this very, very key pledge to build 1.5 million new homes by the end of this parliament, and that is very much a KPI, if you will, that the public will be judging them on come the next election. So I think we have seen progress, but HS2 will also be a very large determinant as to how successful the progress is. Mm-hmm. And if the nation doesn't start building quicker and doesn't clean up its act on infrastructure, how the economy is going to grow and how we're going to pull ourselves out of this cost of living crisis will be interesting.
No, and Ava, for this hour, thank you so much. We'll see you again next hour. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back after this.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered.